We have the questions some of you submitted when you registered for this event, and the producers are monitoring the Q&A box. Please feel free to type in your questions throughout this event. And if you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, type any questions into the comments section and I will get those. We look forward to hearing from all of you. We also have a new closed captioning feature. To activate that feature, click the live transcript button on the bottom of your screen. You can select subtitle to enable captioning at the bottom of your screen. And we've added additional directions in the chat tab for your reference. We'll get going in just a moment. It is great to have you here tonight for our latest GBH News Forum. This event is presented by the combined efforts of GBH News and the GBH Forum Network. That is a small team that works with many partner organizations in the Boston region to produce and record public lectures and discussions and to publish them online. There is a treasure trove of information on that website. Tonight, we welcome their partners at the Museum of African American History. Thank them so much for helping to support this event. Our news forums provide us with an opportunity to take a deeper dive into important stories from GBH News and to connect you with the reporters and the experts, as well as share with you more information and resources, and of course, give you an opportunity to ask some questions. Tonight, we'll discuss a story that GBH News has been working on for more than a year, the inequities in government contracting and public spending that were revealed by the work of GBH News Center for Investigative Reporting in a series that we've called The Color of Public Money. Throughout tonight's discussion, we'll discuss more of this reporting and talk about the challenges for minority-owned businesses, especially as the pandemic continues to exacerbate the economic disparities we see here in Massachusetts. We'll get to the panel in just a minute. First, I want to introduce Paul Singer. We call him just Singer, and we may have an entire forum just on that. But he is the investigations editor at the GBH News Center for Investigative Reporting and currently the interim executive editor at GBH News. Singer reports and edits major investigative projects, including the series The Color of Public Money, which, of course, we will be focusing on tonight. Singer, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Aaron, and thank you for our panelists for joining. I'm really excited we get the chance to talk about the series, and I think the panelists here are more expert, really, than any of the rest of us. So it's a perfect opportunity.
Well, Singer, before we get going, we will have lots of time to chat with the panelists. Just give us an overview, if you would, about how this series got going and what the point of it is.
Sure. I mean, the series began with the question, basically, why minority businesses were struggling to get government contracts. And in fact, I'll tell you that at some point we began this thing with a giant list of contracts and minority businesses weren't anywhere in them. And so we went to ask Beckma and Shagun whether we were missing the point here or this was the point. And in fact, he pointed out, this was the point. It is extraordinarily challenging for minority businesses to get government contracts in Massachusetts at any level, state, local, even working with large nonprofits, working with universities. And we began to document that. And what started out as what we thought was a couple of stories has now been a year and a half. What we've been able to show, and I'm not able to see the slides, but I know that we have some of the slides that we're showing the viewers. What we've been able to prove is that the value of contracts, state contracts, won by minority-owned businesses in Massachusetts has declined over the past couple of decades. In addition, we're able to prove that the state of Massachusetts, realizing this at some point, began changing the way they counted minority contracts so that they could count basically anything that any government contractor spent with a minority business. So they just started like sweeping all this stuffing into the numbers to make it look like they were doing better than they were. We were able to establish that the Steamship Authority has not actually hired a black business in 5 years. We were able to establish that universities around the state average about 2% usage of minority-owned businesses, including a giant purchasing collaborative of universities, which GBH is a member of. 700 vendors, 14 are minorities. And then I think the most recent one, which we'll talk about first, is today's story by Chris Burrell that shows that minority businesses in Massachusetts, there's I think 3% of businesses with employees are owned by minorities in Massachusetts. That's half the rate of other states around the country. Every level we peel back, we find the same thing, that minority-owned businesses are being locked out. That, we believe, is what structural racism looks like, and we are going to continue to dig at it.
And I would like to point out, which we'll talk about later, that at the beginning of our series, I think it was January or February, the governor said, we're doing great. And then by the end of last year, 2020, the governor said, well, maybe we're not doing so great. And we'll talk about that. A lot changed, or I guess we hope things have changed based on this series. Let's start with Segun Edowu. He is the executive director of the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts. The mission there is to advance the economic well-being of Black businesses and organizations that serve the Black community and Black residents of Massachusetts. And as Singer said earlier, he is the expert on all this. Segun, if you would, we ran a story this morning about how Blacks and Latinos make up more than a fifth of the population in Massachusetts, but as Singer said, own just about 3% of the businesses with employees. Why this gap, and why does Massachusetts lag behind the rest of the nation?
Well, first I want to thank you, Aaron, and Singer, and everyone at GBH for hosting this panel discussion tonight on this really important topic. And I'll say at the outset for those who are tuning in that I apologize if I am repeating or sound repetitive tonight, because most of the information we'll be sharing you've probably heard before, because these are things that particularly in the Black and Latinx community we've been talking about for decades. And so, I want to give kudos to Paul and to Chris for continuing to keep their thumb on this issue and to keep reporting on it, especially for the article that came out this morning. To answer this question of why we see such a dearth of Black and Latinx businesses that employ people, it's not for a lack of trying on our part. I can start off by saying that. One of the things the article mentions is that when you take into account self-employed individuals, that number, balloons, even though it's still half of what it is on the national scale. It goes from 3 to 9. So many of our businesses do want to get to a place where they're able to hire more people from their community, provide better wages, provide benefits that help to sustain families. But a lot of the reasons why we're not able to are things that folks have heard before. I won't say a lack of access to capital. I'll say it's a lack of the people that have capital actually giving it to Black and Latinx businesses. We know how to access the capital. We know where it is. It's just that folks aren't opening the doors to us, whether they be banks, whether they be venture capital funds, et cetera. And some of this goes to contracting as well, which I know we'll get into later on. We're not investing or making opportunities available to our businesses. So these are some of the reasons that we're seeing our folks not being able to employ more people and to add to that number.
Thank you, Segun. And we'll dig into this, obviously, much more as we go along. I'd like to bring in next Rosario Ubiera Minaya. She is the executive director of Amplify Latinx, a nonpartisan collaborative movement with the mission of building Latinx economic and political power by increasing civic engagement and representation in leadership positions across the sectors. Rosario, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting.
A pleasure to have you. How much of the lag that Segun talked about can be attributed to the fact that the state government and some city governments, even like Boston, made these grand plans about what they were going to do and the numbers they were going to hit, and then just, from what we've seen, failed miserably?
Right. So based on what Shagun just mentioned, and we've been talking about for years, like he said, in the Latinx community and the Black communities, and also through your investigative reporting and the data that has been released through also the study, we know that in Massachusetts, minority entrepreneurs are getting a very small piece when it comes to doing businesses with local governments or cities. Massachusetts contracts going to minority-owned businesses have fallen 24%. That's 135 million less per year paid to minority entrepreneurs. And minority-owned business face significant barriers in getting government contracts. Like Segun said, lack of uh, partnerships with where there's capital, and those institutions not really providing the capital, but also structures that are antiquated, that are not creating these opportunities, mainly because businesses are not connected, they don't have those networks, and the opportunity also for certification is not readily available. And so these contracts are not usually offered to Black and Brown businesses. There is also frustration from small business owners that those that do apply, they talk about how long it takes, how the process is so cumbersome, and it's just another barrier. Amplify Latinx led a survey last year of small businesses in collaboration with Mass Inc. and the Coalition for Equitable Economy. And over 70% of Latino businesses reported that they are seeking grant capital, and 68% say that they need new customers and contracting opportunities. So this is about economic opportunity. Black and Brown owned businesses remain smaller than white owned firms. So if resources were more readily available, they could multiply revenue and jobs. So why do we continue seeing these disparities when there are best practices that we could be implementing and that we've been talking about for years? So this is about a deeper and bigger issue that I know we're going to get to, that has to do with rooted inequities in existing systems and, frankly, structural racism.
And there is a sad irony which came up in the story today by Christopher Burrell, that sometimes the is the cure is worse than the disease. There was a business owner who said, when I walk in the door, they shunt me to one side as a Black business owner, and instead of just giving me a loan like they would do to everyone else, or introducing me to the movers and shakers in the city. I want to move on at the moment to Representative Russell Holmes. He represents Massachusetts' 6th Suffolk District, which includes portions, at least, of the communities of Dorchester, Mattapan, Hyde Park, Roslindale, and Jamaica Plain. As a community leader, Representative Holmes has worked passionately on issues related to local economic development, education, and public transportation. Representative, I want to know two things from you, if you would. I guess why is government failing, it seems, on this issue, and what was the reaction to what lawmakers heard and what the governor said on Beacon Hill?
So thank you for having me. But I guess I look at this and not just a small, hey, here's what's happening here in Boston, here's what's happening in the state. I look at it from a conceptual, I like to frame things. This is not unintentional. This is intentional. The reason why Black people and brown people are not getting contracts is because white people doesn't want us to have them. So when it's like this conversation about why is it that we're getting so small of an amount, this is what I keep when you say we have a. Let me just step back and say the Black and Latino Caucus. We meet with the governor every 3 months, and rest assured, that's an hour and a half of just this conversation right here. Is in your face. Why is it we're not getting contracts? And it's not like I can just lay it onto the governor like this is his responsibility. He's only been in office for 6 years. That's 6 years out of 401 years of white people getting what they wanted. And it's like, okay, I don't expect this guy to solve it all, but I just like to just frame it, and I'll let you guys go back to your framing, which is 250 years of slavery, 100 years of apartheid, and 50 years of voting rights, and some things that now we as Black people have to fight everything that Nixon did with his Supreme Court, everything that Reagan did with his Supreme Court, and now everything that Trump did to take all the things that we thought we were getting in the 60s and start to just rip it out from us every single way they could. And so now, you know, Black and brown folks are still trying to figure out how is it that we got $9 million. It's because it's intentional. And so what did the governor say, or what did the legislature say? They say what they typically say. They're all trying to do the best they can. But me as a Black man, still say in almost every single room, how do I expect to go to a leadership team that expects to be all white in the Senate and then all white in the House, except for one person now you've made as a person of color in your leadership team, and ask these folks to now go fight for Black and brown people. This is systemic, is real, and whether that be Charlie having none of his cabinet be people of color as well, these are things that we have to just continue to take to folks every single day, because it's real. It is in the soil of this country and in the fabric of everything you look at, from housing to you know, economic development. We don't have the wealth that many of these white folks have to go and do these contracts the way they're doing them. So I forgot what your first question was, but they say what they normally say at the State House and in legislature. They're doing the best they can. And just know that my conversation is very different than what everyone else's, because I'm a Black man with the blackest district in the Commonwealth, and these are not things that are new to any of us. Thank you guys as white folks for doing it. Let me just say that. I get sick and tired of the fact that when Black people have to come have this conversation, we sound like we're begging. I'm happy that WGBH is actually doing something, because we need white people, moderate whites, as Dr. King used to say, to come and advocate for us as well.
Can we change this situation, Representative? I don't mean we, GBH.
No,
although that
yeah,
would be nice.
no, yeah,
But
you, yes. Let me just tell you, we could
all of
change
us
it.
together.
Yes, yes. I've just learned. What's unfortunate is that I have to embarrass people constantly with facts. Let me just try to just tell you how I frame things with the governor, and I'll let you go back to your program, because I know this is not. I got added here. I frame it this way. I start with facts, and so I treat it like a goalpost. Literally, I start everything with facts, and we have the facts. You have them all, so we can talk about what's been going on in Boston, what's going on in the state, and then I have it like a goalpost. There are two uprights. The first upright with the governor is it is always the right time to do what is right. That's how I get the first upright frame. And the second upright is simply, whether it be class, gender, race, society, all of us have talent, and talent distributed equally amongst all of us. What is not distributed equally is opportunity. And that's what our job is, or should be, in the legislature. And I fight with the gov and his team and everyone else at the legislature to create opportunities, because I can guarantee you we as people of color can succeed if we have the opportunities. And I'll back up and get off make room for the experts. I apologize. You just asked me a question. I will get started.
I could listen to you talk all night, but we'll move on to Segun. You have the ear as well of the governor and other leaders in the state and the city. What are you asking them for? What are you calling on our elected officials to do?
Well, you know, I'm gonna use the opportunity to build on a point that Representative Holmes was making, who, by the way, is one of my favorite folks in the legislature and always tells the truth, no matter who's in the audience, which we badly need everyone else to do. First of all, as the rep said, we're trying to redress 400 years of something that's systemic. This is what Rosario brought up earlier. I mean, for one reason I'm happy that Chris and Paul have continued this investigation is it's peeling back this veneer in Massachusetts that we are the most liberal progressive state in the union. And, those people in the South, they're all racist, and, we are enlightened and treat people equally. When the numbers, have a governor and here in Boston, a mayor who say they're data driven, and the data is telling them that racism is very deep, marrow deep in this state. And so how we address it, though, and the reason why, a group like BECMA or Amplify really push hard on folks like the governor or the mayors of these cities and towns, is that racism was intentional. And the only way we're going to address it is if the solutions are equally as intentional of eliminating all these disparities that we're talking about. So for, again, the Rep. Holmes has talked about how folks are just, the legislature talk is on with Jim Browdy earlier. And, I share proverbs everywhere I go. And the one I always think about when I think about this particular issue is to talk much and arrive nowhere is the same as climbing a tree to catch a fish. We do so much talking in this state about these issues. And that's all we offer when it comes to Black and Latinx communities. We offer talk rather than substantive solutions. So what we've been calling for, to your question about what we called on the governor to do, and we can get to what we're calling on Boston to do, because that's present day news. But back in January of 2020, when Singer and Christopher published their first article on spending, Rosario mentioned earlier the $135 million value of the decrease in contracting with us. We called for a number of things, and it was really important that this came out in January, because several days after this article was printed was MLK Day. And so the governor, the mayor, all these other folks were going to be showing up to a room of 1,000 Black people and saying, "We shall overcome. Martin Luther King, best person ever in the country, and we need to keep following his example. And their policies and the data show that they are doing everything but following in the footsteps of Dr. King." And so we sent out a statement that said, "You better not show up in front of Black people and talk about you appreciate Martin Luther King, and you're not doing anything that Martin Luther King said we ought to be doing as a nation," particularly when you have these numbers. So, we called for a number of things. Making the Diversity Office an independent agency, setting aside a bunch of money in the budget to support technical assistance and offer grants to Black and brown businesses. But the one really important piece that we're going to keep pushing for, if you talk to Peter Hurst, who's the executive director of the Greater New England Minority Supplier Development Council, one thing that BECMA and his group continue to push for is tying any changes we make to performance evaluations and to the hiring or firing of individuals. Because our thing is, no one is being held accountable for these numbers. Whatever goals we set, if it's not someone's job, if their bonuses or them keeping their job is not tied to hitting or exceeding these goals, or making sure that Black and brown businesses are aware of these opportunities, everyone's going to say, "Oh, we missed the ball again. We'll try better next time." And we will keep getting this 1% all the time. So we've been calling for all these things for a year. We were, because of a coalition that we built alongside Amplify Latinx and the Mass Association of CDCs, Foundation for Business Equity, Commonwealth Kitchen, and many others, we were able to get the governor to capitulate to all of the demands that we've been making. And our allies in the legislature helped to ensure that we had lots of money available to our businesses who are deeply in need of economic relief.
Thank you, Segun. Rosario, this is all happening, the series, this conversation we're having in the middle of a pandemic, which I assume has made things considerably worse. I wonder, what has the pandemic meant for minority-owned companies? And is there anywhere that you've seen around the country that's doing this right?
Well, there is no denying that there has been a disproportionate impact on minority-owned businesses. Since June 2020, 82% of Latino businesses reported immediate negative impacts, and only 16% of these businesses might sustain more than 7 months of the cash flow registered during the pandemic. So we know that there's serious issues that have been affecting minority-owned business, Black and brown businesses since the pandemic started. I continue saying that, through all of this, we are seeing generational wealth really disappearing in front of our eyes. And that's something that is very concerning for our Black and brown communities, but not only for our communities, but really for our economy as a whole, because we are all affected by it. About 35% of Latinx businesses may permanently close as a result of the pandemic. But also, Latinx businesses continue to be the fastest growing segment in the US economy. And the recovery of the economy is really dependent on scaling up Black and brown businesses. So that way there can be more jobs created in our communities. We can build that wealth or rebuild it and really support innovation growth. And so some of the practical solutions that we see that have been working in other states, Segun started to mention those as we requested and demanded those to be implemented here. We need to increase minority contracting goals. We need to develop more uniform procurement policies across the city departments. We have to break up large contracts into smaller parts so small businesses can really compete for the work. There's also, all of that is really part of implementing an effective supplier diversity program that provides the opportunities that our minority-owned businesses need, but also offering that technical assistance for survival in the short term. That's really, really important. Those resources, grants, that capital is really important. And so also having that collaboration between the public and private sectors, including chambers, others that can support the sustainability of these businesses.
Okay, we have a lot of people watching online, and we've gotten a lot of questions ahead of this event, and we will get to those in just a second. But first, I want to put Singer on the spot. You've heard now some of the solutions that are being offered up. How does the GBH Center for Investigative Reporting moving forward hold politicians to account for their promises?
Some of that I can't talk about because we're still working on it and I don't want to give it away. But let me say the following things. One of the things we discovered in the reporting of this series is that you get what you count, and where we have found communities that have succeeded in increasing their minority contracting, it has been communities where the mayor or the governor or the head of purchasing, I think it was UMass Amherst, we've seen it in places where whoever the CEO is basically says, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to prioritize. And this is what we're going to count. This gets to, I think, Segun's point of, if you put it into people's performance evaluations, you're going to get it. So we asked some of the same questions. All right, well, they said they're going to do this stuff. What are they going to get? For instance, I can tell you, the governor did create this new, elevated this new agency. The Office of Supplier Diversity is now becoming a standalone, quote unquote, agency. So the question is, well, then are they going to increase their budget? Well, that's something we can find out in the next 6 months, right? We'll look at the budget and find out, well, did they actually spend up? Are they going to do more? And if they're not, then whatever they're saying is just palaver, right? If they're, let's measure it, let's count it. We can see the numbers, and I think Segun made this point, also mentioned in passing, the disparity study that Boston just released is stunning, stunning. That I talked to the mayor and he told me, one of the challenges, we can't find Black businesses to do this work. Like, yeah, you know what? It's not true. It's not true. And it's repeated all over the country. It's not true. I've been looking at disparity studies all over the country. There's my only hint. And it's not true anywhere. What you find is there are Black and brown businesses everywhere, and yet their access to contracts is less than their appearance in the economy everywhere. So let's get those numbers. Let's tell that story. Let's show that data, and let's prove that this is what structural racism looks like. And the only real reason why these companies are not getting the work is because they are Black and because they're brown. That's it.
I just want to add something in.
Yes, sir.
It's just hard for me to sit here and hear all of this. Can I, at some point, I need to get back in, please?
Go ahead.
All right.
We're going to go to questions right after this, but you.
I was going to say exactly what Singer said. You need to hire, we as a city need to hire a mayor who thinks this is a number one priority. This can't be, I'm sick and tired of teaching white people what structural racism is. I'm sick of it. It's like you have to bring someone gets elected, and then they have to be taught and convinced. There are a lot of times when I have to literally just convince people that structural racism exists. Because in particular, it's almost all white men. They'll say, I earned this. This is a meritocracy, right? And then I'll say, well, how did you start this? I mean, how did you start this business? And then the first word you would think, Singer, that they would say would be to me, you think they would say I, right? They would say, I did something, right? But that's not normally the first word they say. Guess what the first word they normally say? My father, my grandfather, my uncle. And then I say, wait a minute, I thought we were talking meritocracy. Oh, your grandfather started a business in 1937 that he gave off to his son that now you have, and that, you know, now you're worth millions and millions of dollars. And you guys have now built up all of these barriers to entries. What does a barrier to entry look like? It looks like, hey, you have to have a certain amount of insurance capability. You have to have a certain amount of project you've done in the past. And so now these companies that were kind of small white companies, they grew out now over multiple generations. They've made it easier for these purchasing people. Singer talked about the purchasing guy. Yeah, he doesn't want some contract. He doesn't want to have it so that now I have to do 15 contracts. No, forget that. I want to do one contract that's a very large contract. And then how am I as a Black man supposed to get into this contract when it was 15 contracts, when it was, you know, decades ago before we laid off everybody in purchasing, and now you have to do it all just by computers. You just want one big contract, give it out, and then you have enormous barriers for me to be able to get to it. So sorry but I'll take some questions. But it's intentional, is what I keep trying to. It is intentional. This is not by accident.
And,
we have
I know
questions from people who want to know what they can do personally. And sorry to interrupt. We'll get to that in just a second. I want to get to my colleague, Sarah Gately. She's a volunteer and auction coordinator in our member engagement department. And she is here with a special offer to share with everyone who is here this evening. Hi, Sarah.
Hello, I'm Sarah Gately from GBH's member engagement department. Thank you for joining us this evening. GBH News is a public service we present to everyone free of charge. However, there is a cost associated with bringing objective, fact-based local journalism to audiences across digital, radio, and television platforms. Our newsroom is free from commercial pressures, and public support helps make this possible, and we genuinely want to thank you. We have a special thank you gift for you when you contribute $60 during this event. We'll say thanks by providing you with this great Stand with the Facts mug. Seeing this mug with your morning coffee or tea will remind you that you did your part in supporting important investigative reporting and great local journalism. It's a small token of our appreciation for your support of our station. You can visit wgbh.org/support events now to show your support in any amount. Every dollar our supporters contribute enabled us to continue to provide informative, insightful, and unbiased reporting. So donate what you can, and every dollar makes an impact. Thanks again for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Sarah. And as I said, I think Segun, you were about to speak, but there are a lot of questions that were sent in before tonight, with people asking, what can the average citizen do to affect change, to support minority businesses? What concrete steps can we do as regular folk?
Well, I'll step in on that one and open it to the rest of the panel as well. I will say, first of all, I hope those mugs were made by a Black or brown business to GBH. So that's the first thing I'll say. I appreciate being here and all that you're doing, but hope those mugs, hope some of that wealth goes back to Black and brown businesses. On what people can, even before we get to that, I want to build again on Rep. Holmes' point. White people also need to understand that racism is costing them. I mean, there are a number of reports that came out in just the last year. McKinsey and Company put out a report, and Citibank put out a report in August that showed that racism has cost the nation $1 trillion since 2000, $1 trillion. And when we think about Massachusetts alone, the stats were given earlier about the percentage of firms owned by Black and brown people. For Black businesses, I mean, they have the most recent 2018, and I saw 2016, so I'm going to take a look at 18. But in 2016, we had 2,000 Black firms that employed 14,000 residents and contributed over $1 billion to this state. That's just from a small percentage. So can we imagine, there are 20,000 self-employed entrepreneurs out here in Massachusetts based on 2016 data. Can you imagine if a majority of those became employee based firms that were hiring people, the billions of dollars that Massachusetts is losing out on because of systemic racism that we, I think Singer mentioned this, it takes leadership. And that's one of the qualities that Massachusetts has been lacking compared to other states and cities. But on this question about what the average person can do, one of the things that happened after the lynching of George Floyd is everyone began to get into the Buy Black movement. I will say that's not something, so we agree, obviously, Buy Black and buy from Latinx businesses, particularly those in the white community. But we also know that those movements die a very short death. After something tragic happens, everyone wants to support our community, and then we go right back into business as usual. Even with all the lists out there, everyone's saying, "Oh, I want to find a list of Black businesses to buy from." It's like there have been lists out there for decades. It's only in these moments that folks want to do that. So for us, on top of supporting our businesses in that way, we put out a petition on the city level last week that we'll be sending in to Mayor Walsh before he hightails it to DC to fix their problem here, because we need to make sure we're putting this pressure on our elected officials, our appointed officials, to put substantive things in motion now that have a long-term effect on the growth and health of our businesses, beyond just what the individual dollar that many people are spending. So those are some things that we're calling on our folks to do. And I will say, I know that tonight's conversation is about state government, and we'll talk a little bit about city government, but we cannot at all let the corporations or the private sector get away with, on this issue, because they are equally terrible on this issue and they actually have more freedom to do business with us, and still every opportunity available they take not to. So there's also the pressure that folks can put on corporations to not, back in the 60s, they did this well of doing boycotts and taking the dollar out of folks that weren't doing business with us. And so we're going to need to revisit that again if we're going to have some measurable change happening here in the Commonwealth.
So I want to thank Brittany and Stephen and many others for their questions about this. And Rosario, do you want to take that on? What can regular folks do?
I would say there is great economic opportunity for the region. I keep on saying that this is the better. Like, we all going to benefit if we see improvements in here. We are hearing directly from Black and brown businesses that what we want and what they want is transparency. Really, transparency in the process, but also in the system for enforcing to make sure that we are moving towards solutions. So I keep on mentioning, as well as Shagun and Representative Holmes, we need leadership that represents the interests of Black and brown communities. And we need it now. It is imperative to increase government contracts for small businesses, Black and brown businesses. We want equality, parity in the process, and we want access. And leadership must come together. We need to work with Black and brown and minority businesses and communities and coalitions to implement these best practices that we know exist, these solutions that have proven to work, not only because it's trying to do, but it's really moving away from disparities and antiquated discriminatory practices. We also need it because it's economically beneficial to do so for all the Commonwealth. So supporting small businesses, contracting small businesses, really not only during Black History Month or Hispanic Heritage Month. We are here, we are in our communities, and we provide great services. So why not? We just need to be contracted, and we need to be acknowledged.
So as Singer said, one of the issues that GBH will be tackling or continuing to tackle is holding people accountable. And we've got a couple questions here from Dakota and Joanne. What are some of the barriers to implementing punitive sanctions against the city or the state for not meeting their goals? And who is the watchdog for the Commonwealth? Representative
All right,
Holmes?
so is that mine? Okay, so here's your problem, right? So again, this goes back to courts. Let me tell you, the moment, it's called white rage. So y'all want to know what you all can do as, white people who are watching in particular, you can just go back through history. read the book White Rage. You can just see in every step along the way, there's been something to stop us. And so what is the thing that stopped us here? We had affirmative action. And then what happened? White people sued and say, no, you can't go and have affirmative action and give this group that you've been disadvantaging for 375 years, you can't give them an advantage, to be able to go and get contracts. And so when we have these conversations about punitive damages, it goes back to we have courts that won't allow that to happen. And so we are, at least I know the Black and Latino caucus and the governor, I'm going to file the bill in the coming days to do something similar to what we stood with the governor last year about, and that is make it mandatory, not make these goals be something that's a goal, but to make it a mandatory goal. You must meet this. And the reason you can't make it punitive now is because essentially everyone is scared they're going to get sued, that if you go and say, I don't hire enough Black and brown people, I can get sued, and then that's going to make it happen. So we're going to make it so there's a mandatory thing. The other thing that we're going to do, to Wazari, what you're talking about, was we're going to make it so that the contracts for general contractors, you can now only have that limit be $150,000 per project, right? And so we're going to grow that to $1 million, make it available, so that now if I'm a plumber, it's easier for me to go and sit under someone's project if they're building something and have their name on it instead of my own business, because they can just pay me because this file sub bid can only be up to $25,000. We're going to make it so that you can chop up that project so that this project might be a $75,000 plumbing project. You can actually just give that whole project to a person of color instead of just saying, hey, come and work for me. Because for so long it's been, hey, Black and brown people have been fighting, we want a job. No, we don't want your job. We want more than just a job now. We want to own the business so we can hire our own people. It seems like Singer want to get in, but I mean, there are things you can do as an average person.
I also want to mention that the oversight of this thing and the enforcement of this thing has been the most surprising thing to us, I think, is that the legal system, as the representative was saying, the courts basically said that you can't set mandatory goals. You can only set these targets. But then even in the places where there are legal requirements, like you signed a contract with the state that said you were going to hire minority businesses to do this portion and you didn't, we've seen a handful of cases, only a handful over the past decade, where anybody's actually been sued for failing to hire the minorities they promised to hire. And part of the reason is that it's not in anybody's interest to tell, right? It's not in the interest of the minority business that got money but got sent away, or maybe it's even if they didn't get the business, it's not in their advantage to tell because they won't get hired the next time. And then the company, of course, cheating, it's not in their interest to tell anybody there's cheating. And the government agency that's supposed to be overseeing this, it's not in their interest to have to admit that they got snookered, basically. And in the governor's case, it's not really in his interest to admit that his agencies are failing to hire minority businesses because he's trying to run on that thing saying, look what I did for minority businesses. It's in everybody's interest to just turn the other cheek and pretend it's not happening. And so the enforcement of these programs, even when there are programs, has been minimal at best. So part of what you can do as a citizen of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is, to call the governor's office, to call your representatives and say, hey, show me your enforcement record. Show me where you have done something on this. Show me when you made it a priority. That's really the only trigger we have to force them to do something. And of course, it's not my job. I'm just writing stories.
Well, it's getting worse now because, again, it goes back to the courts, right? And so it's not just in people's interest. It is, there have been times when Black people have gone to courts and we actually lost that and made it worse for us. And so we have to be very careful about when we decide to go and remedy something in the court systems. And you can guarantee, I'm not feeling like, hey, this is a Supreme Court I want to go have a conversation with anytime soon. So, it's like, you have to also see that this is what I mean. It's intentional. And so rest assured, we're going to stay on the governor. And please, all the folks who are on the call, we do need your help on this issue. And I'll let it go to the next question. Even I know this wasn't the mayor's race, but I've been telling people, don't go and pick who you want to be with the mayor. First, stop the special election, because that's bad for Black and brown people, period. Stop the special election. Come up with an agenda that includes this. If you don't understand now, after seeing this report in this city, how this should not be one of the major priorities for the next mayor, then we have a problem. And then sorry about that, choose a mayor that will then have this as one of his or her priorities, period. Elect right people.
Singer, I want quickly, we have a question from Jack and Susan, who are listening now, and Kelly as well. They're wondering what the metrics are that we can use to measure contracting and measure success moving forward. And also, how does the distribution of money in Massachusetts compare to other states?
I'm not going to be able to tell you how the distribution compares to other states, only because doing this state by state is extraordinarily challenging. But we can tell you there have been some cities that have been very successful. We know Chicago's been pretty successful. We know Philadelphia has gotten to points where they've had something like
Black mayors.
Black mayors. That's right. Oh.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but yeah.
No. But what we started with, I mean, the very first easy way to go look at this is what's called the annual report of the Supplier Diversity Office. It's on their website, the Office of Supplier Diversity. They put out these reports, and you can see, and it helps if you read our stories to go look, and you can just see where they are saying they are spending money with minority-owned businesses. And what you will see is that the increase has been much smaller than you would expect it to be. It's been a decline over 20 years. Those reports are harder to get. And you'll see that they split it into two categories about 5 years ago. And the category of actual spending with Black contractors, minority contractors, has stayed more or less level, gone up a little bit. And the category that the state has been relying on is this other category of sawdust that they sort of throw in there to stuff the numbers up. So you can see these annual reports from the state. You can also go, the city just published, the city of Boston just published their disparity report. I warn you, it is detailed data and hard to read, but the summaries are very clear. There are, I think the numbers were, Sugar, maybe you'll correct me here, I think the numbers were like 4% of the city's businesses were Black owned, and 0.4% of the contracts the city gave were to Black owned businesses. Like, the numbers are right there and they're easy to read.
I mean, I'll just add to that, so yes, 3.6% of the businesses that they looked at that were available, and I'm going to come back to that, were Black owned. And the way that the firm that did this disparity study defined available was a business that had capacity and a desire to do business with the city. They had a history of bidding on a contract. So the one point that I hope we get across tonight is that Black and brown businesses have the capacity, they're just not being used. And so that 3.6% of people that want to do business, it's actually a lot greater. It's a 700-page report, but it actually goes up to 7% when you include people who said, screw the, well, I know this is GBH, so who say, bump doing business with the city because I'm not gonna get the contract because 0.4%. So why spend the money and the time trying? So, we have the capacity. It's about the leadership and making sure that whoever is at the top, as Rep. Holmes said, whoever's that mayor, that POC mayor, because that's when we see that change come, that this is one of their top priorities.
And
Rosario,
so many people. I'd let her get in, please. I apologize. We've been running this, just running right over.
This is a bit of a specific question for you, Rosario, but I do think it can be instructive for broader businesses. The question is, with new leadership at the Massachusetts League of Community Health Centers, there is a great opportunity to train CHC purchasing professionals to access and contract with more minority-owned community businesses. How can I or other interested folks be part of an alliance among Amplify Latinx and BECMA to get this done?
We work in collaboration with so many different groups representing the interests of Black and brown communities. So through contacting us, getting involved with us, that's what we're doing. We're advocating for all of these resources and opportunities for having representation. So just be in touch with us, and I'm happy to guide you with more details on how to become more involved. But I will say that in the sense of what was being addressed before in general about what can you do, what is important, of course, representation does matter, and Black and brown legislators are important. We need them. We really need those voices that really can relate to what Black and Brown communities and small businesses are facing. And also, one of the things that I've been hearing that we have the data to back up is that the three most important factors needed for Black and Brown businesses to grow are access to capital, again, the bank institutions to give us that capital, access to contracting opportunities, and access to influential social and business networks. So that networking piece is really, really important. So Black and Brown businesses need also access to consultants, business mentors, technical assistants, assistance to digital transformation, and contracting support to really understand how to apply to those contracts and get that certification. So all of you out there that have those that expertise and can provide that support and can support with technical assistance, but also those corporate heads that are managing a lot of resources and the banks that are managing a lot of that capital, is intentional. We need to stop doing, creating those barriers and really create those opportunities for our Black and Brown businesses to have access to all of those resources.
We have a question here. Someone is asking if we can name names, a little naming and shaming, but I actually want to flip this on its head. Is Rosario or anyone doing a good job? Are there any examples that we can point to at all? No.
No. Next
all right,
question.
That was easy. Next question.
I guess let me answer it this way. It is very difficult. Like when you say who's doing a good job, I would say John Cruz, right? You can see John Cruz hiring an awful lot of people of color in his business. You can say, I can say even Kirk Sykes. There are folks who are being intentional. You can say Greg Janey and his group. But see, all the folks who we're naming are people of color, right? And so the question is, can we ever break the network? And does getting Lindo Docino Fori in at Suffolk, is that enough? And his team to grow that when you just John Fish, she's very supportive of lots of us, right? But that's multi-generational wealth that's been built with multi-generational relationships that were built not with people of color. And so you don't just go knock down those relationships that's been being worked on for decades. And so it is difficult to just do this overnight, but I'm just simply saying it has to be intentional, and it has to be that CEO to what the others are saying, that is saying this, what Singer said, this is what we're going to do, period. Sorry.
And providing that support. I mean, I was being a little flip earlier and didn't realize it was more than just government, for who's doing a good job, because the rep is absolutely right. Businesses owned by people of color that's why we focus so much, especially as an organization, on helping to sustain our businesses, because we hire our people. We provide the sustainable wages and provide the benefits that help to keep families from having to pay exorbitant rates for medical insurance or dental, insurance, et cetera. And so we're also doing, because we have to, because we've only been able to rely on ourselves because we can't rely on government or white businesses to provide that support. But, to Rep. Holmes' point about, and what Rosario said as well about representation, the disparity study, I hate to put it in this way, but Boston's disparity study shows us that representation is not the only thing that matters. It's important to have people of color in these positions, but they also need to have the power. And so it's one thing for the CEO to say that we need to do this, is another to provide to empower somebody to actually do it. I mean, we brought this up over the summer when, I hate to keep beating up on them, but 0.4% of me cares about what the city feels on this matter, but over the summer, Boston discovered racism and that it was something we needed to defeat. And then we hired a chief equity officer. But the question that everyone was asking was, well, what is this office going to be empowered to do? And I suggested this person ought to have the same powers as a deputy mayor, because racism you can't put it in one department. It is systemic. It's all across the board. And so my point in bringing that up is that, if we're going to really address this issue, it comes that leadership from saying that it's an issue, naming it, claiming it, and then putting all of your power and resources behind dismantling it and replacing it with the system that should be the new world that we all want to live in. But if people are not committed to that, they should also be honest about that, because a lot of people are not, everyone wants to live in the world of ponies and roses and rainbows, but a lot of people are not committed to doing the work to make that happen, and because they feel as if something's being taken away from them without realizing that we're actually trying to expand the pie and to make sure that everybody has access to this tremendous opportunity to create, grow our communities.
And can I just add, I'm sorry to jump, but I just want to add that is that all of the government contracts are based on a lowest price contract.
That's right. That's what I wanted to talk about.
Procurement officials will tell you, well, the lowest price was Staples.
That's
man.
right.
They could produce office paper, much, much cheaper than, Shogun's company that is a locally grown minority-owned business. And so they feel that their hands are tied by this, that they don't have the power to say, I'm going to choose to buy from Shogun in a local minority business. Well, and again, this gets back to the taxpayer. Are you willing to go to your leadership and say, look,
Yep.
willing to have our government spend an extra few bucks on paper if it's coming from locally owned businesses, instead of having to go buy from Staples because that's the cheapest cost. And that is something that as a taxpayer, you have to be able to, and as a shopper, you should ask the same question, right? Am I going to go to the Safeway and get the coffee beans there, or am I going to go to a locally sourced Latino business that's selling coffee beans and buy it there for an extra couple bucks a bag because it's important to me to support? It's the same concept all the way up. The government has just taken the position that basically, well, in order to save the taxpayers money, we're only going to buy the cheapest product.
And that is the
Okay,
real issue.
hang on,
right there.
Representative, just a moment. We're rapidly
time.
approaching
Oh, yeah.
the end of our time. I would like to give each of you very a short moment to I don't know what I'm getting myself in for here, but a short moment to kind of wrap up this evening. Mr. Holmes, you were about to say.
Yep. So I'll wrap up with what Singer was talking about. That is exactly our problem. We will never get to economies of scale when we're these small businesses and we compare those to businesses that are into multi-generational, that have been able to grow and buy supplies. Even for, like, I have a friend who wants to keep winning contracts. That's a cleaning business, and he can't. The other businesses may be cleaning, 30 buildings, and he's cleaning 5. So you don't get to that same economies of scale to be able to go in and put a bid in. That is one of the things that we definitely have to address. Thank you, Singer, for saying it. Thank you all for joining me tonight.
Rosario?
I will say that we need radical change, and it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be different, but we need everyone to be able to achieve what we want to achieve. This is not only a Black and brown issue, it's a Commonwealth issue, and it's affecting all of us. So it is on our best interest, not only for the Black and brown communities, but for the Commonwealth as a whole. If you don't care about anything else, but you care about the economical benefits of this is the time to do it. And as white allies, I think it's very important that each one of you listening today to make that commitment, because that's how we're going to be able to move forward and towards a change.
Shagun?
So in 30 seconds or less, I'll leave on 2 things. The first is, and I share this everywhere I go, my grandfather telling me almost 10 years ago now not to confuse motion with progress. So if I could leave any bit of advice with the people who are watching and tuning in, it is not to confuse motion with progress. The words that we hear, some of the toothless either executive orders or policies that sometimes come out without support of the community, we cannot confuse motion with progress, because it's how we got where we are today. The second thing I'll say is, I always leave on a proverb. I start with the proverb and with the proverb because other people's words are way better than mine. But it's a Chinese proverb that says, if you want 1 year of prosperity, grow grain. If you want 10 years of prosperity, grow trees. But if you want 100 years of prosperity, grow people. And it's incredibly important that the people who are listening here today are supporting organizations like Amplify, like BECMA, supporting getting more people of color elected to legislatures and city councils and town halls, so that we are instituting substantive policies that help to grow our businesses, which in turn help to grow people and ensure the sustainability of our Commonwealth for generations to come. So I appreciate GBH for all this reporting. Please keep doing what you're doing. We're going to keep supporting you in doing that, holding folks accountable, exposing the truth, and then using that to ensure that we're implementing policies that are life-changing, not just, as Rosario said, for Black and Brown communities, but for the Commonwealth overall.
Singer, quickly, what's coming up in color of public money?
I'm just going to say, my takeaway is watch this space. We have our teeth into this issue now, and we are not about to let go. We find it fascinating, and we're trying to figure out ways to take it national as well. So we will keep at it.
Thank you, Singer, and thank you all for attending another GBH News Forum. And thanks, of course, to our panelists, Segun Eduwu, Rosario Uberio-Mene, Paul Singer, and Representative Russell Holmes for sharing your knowledge and perspective with us this evening.
Thank you.
And thank you as well to the Museum of African American History for partnering with us on tonight's event. We hope you will join us again for the next GBH News Forum. In the meantime, visit wgbh.org/events for upcoming virtual event opportunities in the weeks ahead. And earlier, my colleague Sarah Gately in the Member Engagement Department mentioned your ongoing support is what allows GBH to bring objective, fact-based local journalism to audiences across radio, television, and digital. I encourage you to contribute what you can by visiting wgbh.org/support events. And of course, there's that lovely mug that you can take advantage of. GBH and Forum Network host hundreds of events year-round. It used to be in person, now it's mostly virtual. Tomorrow night at 7, we are hosting a free discussion featuring GBH President John Abbott, Dr. William Smitty Smith, and Craig Rothman, co-executive producer of a film series, American Stories, Race, Amity, and the Other Tradition. Their conversation will focus on the power of race amity in advancing access, equity, and social justice. To learn more about this or other upcoming virtual events, as I said, visit wgbh.org/events. And last but not least, before you leave, we want to hear your feedback about tonight's event. Please take a moment to fill out the event survey that will pop up on your screen as you exit tonight's webinar. Thanks again to everyone who joined us, to our panelists, and to you for supporting the great work that GBH does. Have a great night.
And thank you, Aaron.
Good night.